of the forcible evictions at Riverdale. May 31st, 2012, the residents of Riverdale Mobile Home Community held a vigil to recognize their collective decision to engage in nonviolent direct action on behalf of the 32 families evicted from their homes, many of which, though mobile homes, were homes that they owned. Let's see. I want to skip ahead a little bit here. Okay, yeah, there's the vigil. PBR Aqua America had purchased the land from Skip Leonard for the construction of a 3 million gallon per day water withdrawal facility for transport to fracking operations in the Williamsport, Jersey Shore region. Well, there's a great deal to be said about the ensuing defense of Riverdale by activists from Occupy Wall Street, Earth First, and Occupy Wall Street, events that proved to be transformative for many of us. For now, I'd like to focus on just one aspect of this history-making occupation and its tragic aftermath. After our 13-day encampment was raided on June 12th by private security forces, local firefighters, and the state police, forcing the activists out of the park, it was a matter of hours before a demolition crew, Alan A. Myers, moved in to clear Riverdale of its remaining homes, yards, and playsets. In fact, 3 families, including 3 children, were still living in the park and did not leave until they reached a settlement with Aqua America on July 12th. That's one of the other pictures of the removal of Debet's mobile home. The settlement, it should be noted, included a gag order. Demolition occurred throughout this period. On a tip from a fellow fractivist, a great guy named Alex Latorta, I began to investigate whether the federally required asbestos inspections had been completed. What I realized was that because the occupiers had prevented anyone representing the industry from entering the park throughout the previous 13 days, right, we blocked it with their homes and with our bodies, and because the number of hours elapsed between the police raid and the demolitions was fewer than 15, no such inspection could have been conducted, much less completed. I called the new DEP Williamsport Air Quality Control Office on June 21st. I explained why an asbestos inspection could not have been done. DEP agent Aaron Weaver was sent to take samples on that day. I called and spoke to Weaver, who was surprised to hear that people were still living in the park, an admission that did not inspire confidence that he had taken any serious walk through the park, because he would have seen the kids. It was summer, and all 3 children would likely have been there. I received a return phone call after a number of attempts on August 1st from Andrea Ryder, DEP Air Quality District Supervisor, Williamsport. She reported to me that a sample was taken July 6th, nearly 3 weeks after Aaron Weaver's, and that the results came back negative for friable asbestos on July 11th, 2012. It remains unclear whether 2 samples were taken or only 1. Ryder then reported that Alan Myers was ordered to stop demolition between June 21st and July 11th. As I have photo documented, however, they did not stop construction or demolition. Moreover, they did not perform an asbestos inspection until, as reported by DEP, on July 9th. These results were not given to DEP until July 19th. When I reported the failure to stop the demolitions to Ryder, her repeated response was a kind of no harm, no foul, that we should be really glad that they didn't find asbestos. But she told me even if they or DEP had found asbestos, it would result in no sanction or fine against Myers or Aqua America, since it could be presumed that the corporation would opt to litigate, that their lawyers would argue that the asbestos could have been released when the residents, under the pressure of the eviction notices, stripped their mobile homes for materials they could sell to make deposits on apartments. Alternately, she pointed out that corporations could argue that because some of the residents smoked, cigarettes could be the source of the asbestos. In any case, said Ryder, it would not be worth DEP's time to pursue any punitive course of action, since, as she put it, the aim of DEP in such cases was not to penalize, but only to educate. Moreover, such violations, she said, and I'm quoting, were like seatbelt infractions. Aqua America promised to do better next time. When I protested, the issue was not, or not exclusively, simply whether asbestos had been found, but whether federal law had been violated, Ryder demurred, insisting again that DEP's primary function was only to monitor such sites. Such a response, I think, is inadequate for the following reasons. One, no inspection for asbestos would likely have been done at all were it not for a citizen who demanded it. Two, the original inspection conducted by DEP was conducted without any recognition that people were living in the park, and this is troubling. Asbestos is a serious carcinogen implicated in mesothelioma, among other cancers, and exposure can have lifelong consequences. Three, that the ultimate and decisive inspection was not conducted until July 9th and not reported until July 19th, and was conducted by the very corporation or its contractors in violation of federal law regarding asbestos inspections is also troubling. It's another version of the fox guarding the henhouse. Fourth, the DEP's response was foot-dragging, both with respect to failing to ensure that the demolitions were halted and with respect to their refusal to impose any penalty, either for failing to perform the inspections or for failing to halt the demolitions, indicates, I think, precisely where DEP's allegiances lay, and it is not with the workers, like that guy, responsible for the demolition, right, or the construction, or with the security guards posted at the park gates 24/7, or with the remaining residents in the park. Indeed, as far as I'm aware, DEP did not check to see whether the demolitions were ever halted. We might be tempted to conclude that while such accounts clearly signify economic class as a relevant factor in addressing the question how negligence like this can happen, we might think that gender seems less a factor. But when you consider that some studies do show that asbestos may be linked to breast cancer, that economic class is closely associated with gender, and that the record that DEP has amassed thus far suggests a consistent refusal to take seriously the charge that fracking from cradle to grave generates significant opportunities for exposure to many forms of carcinogen, we have, I think, to conclude that gender, as well as class status, are factors in such stories of negligence and failure of oversight. That water withdrawal is not directly connected to fracking, right? And that's the construction of a 3 million gallon a day water withdrawal facility. The water withdrawal is not directly connected to fracking chemicals or produced water, I think, is irrelevant. Indeed, given that produced water cannot be returned to the water table, that only 3% of the Earth's water is potable, that women, whether in the first or in the developing world, remain principally responsible for the cooking, cleaning, and bathing that depends on clean water, and given that water security stands as among the most pressing and urgent of social issues in many countries, it cannot be denied, I think, that fracking, in all of its phases, takes a particular and heavy toll on women, and particularly poor women. Some of the bravest among those who resisted Aqua America during the occupation of Riverdale were women. Deb Eck, the leader of the resistance, among the residents, was finally forced out of her home on July 12th. And this is the day, this is about 2 minutes before she actually left. The irony, however, is not that she and her twin daughters were evicted from their community. That is merely unjust. These are her children were painting the barricades during the occupation. The irony is that while she was forced to sign a gag order preventing her from exercising her constitutional right to publicly protest Aqua America, much less sue them, say, for potential exposure to asbestos, she was also forced by the necessities of her 60-hour, at least per week, job to move to a trailer court next to a 2-lane highway where endless frac trucks compete for road space with school buses, and where within an hour's drive exists at least 2 more water withdrawals, active fracking operations, transmission lines, and compressor stations. That's where she moved. This is how corporate America comprehends its citizens. We're expected to applaud the corporation who assures us that energy security is national security, that the good American is she who is willing to suffer life in the sacrifice zone, as is emblematic of her patriotic pride. Yet we know that even this is a lie. Deb Eck's sacrifice was not for country, but for the profitability of global markets whose sale of natural gas, LPG, petroleum, and coal fuels the economies of the highest bidder, regardless their feelings for America or Americans. The tragedy for Deb Eck is that while we expect such reprehensible behavior from the corporations that brought us the BP disaster, contribute to climate change, and convert our public lands into private real estate, we ought to be able to expect better from the representatives we elect to uphold our state constitution and embody our democratic decision-making. DEP not only failed Deb Eck and her children, but in fact acted on behalf of those who have failed Deb Eck 1,000 times. And these are mostly white, still mostly affluent, and mostly male. Yeah. Oh, whoops. I could put that one. No, that's not upside down. That's Deb Eck coming back to Riverdale a few days later, trying to help a few other people get their belongings out. And she's hugging the child of a family who at this point is virtually homeless. You know, I have another section, but I wonder if this is a moment, I mean, I'm kind of willing to leave it up to you. I have this third section of this paper about charitable organizations, but I can pause here and we can just talk if you like, or I can finish whatever we like to do. I know that I was asked to take a pause at least 40 minutes in. What would you like? I have some more pictures that I can show you. I have some criticism that makes me fairly unpopular of the Susan G. Komen Foundation for taking frack money. I can read a little bit of that. It's what would you like? Okay. I have a few more pictures. Yeah. And I can back up to a few too if you'd like. Let me actually back up just a little bit here. Okay, yeah, this is construction at Riverdale during that period where I was trying to get an asbestos investigation and trying to find out the results. They kept telling me that they had stopped construction, but I just kept driving out there. It's about an hour from where I live. I live in Columbia County. And as you can see, the guy's been there and this stuff is all moving and construction is still going on and demolition is still going on and people are still living there at this point, are still living in that park. I just think this is incredible. That's their mobile home, Mount Myers. This is the police raid. We occupied Riverdale. This is one of the most phenomenal events I've ever been involved in, and I have a long history of political activism across states. But this is one of the most incredible days, I think, actually, of my life. And we had occupied this park for 13 days, including the vigil on May 31st. And we had stopped for that entire 13 days anyone from coming into the park that was going to begin construction, that was going to begin demolition, that was going to be any part of the construction of that water withdrawal. Right behind, just as you go back, the green line back there, that is the Susquehanna River, right? These are the remaining mobile homes. There's a state police that had come in, right? And I don't know how many of you have ever been caught in a police raid, but when you see these guys with lots of plastic handcuffs and pepper spray and billy clubs and big guns, it was pretty chilling, and it took them 5 hours to get us out. It was ultimately the case that none of us were arrested because Deb Eck actually came out and pleaded with us finally to stand down. We were prepared to sit down. Sometimes I think in order to stand up for something, I think sometimes you sit down and you prepare to be arrested for it if it matters that much. And this did. This mattered. These people worked hard. Some of these people are homeless. Among the reasons it was so incredibly difficult for these people to leave was because the Williamsport area is just saturated with fracking. So many of the apartments that they might have been able to rent, the rents were very much higher and they simply could not afford them. There were no lot rents. There were no mobile home lots for them to rent because mobile homes there have effectively become what are called man camps, right? So, and they're very expensive because the landowners can
command that kind of rent, right? So these folks had nowhere to go, and a lot of these folks, one gentleman, Fred, who I don't happen to have in this set of pictures, you can find all these in my 61 photo albums on Facebook. Like, he's in his 80s. The guy was in his 80s. It's his remaining mobile home over here on the side. And he had lived there for 32 years of his life. He didn't even know where else to go, right? And he owned his home, right? But he didn't own the land that it sat on, right? And so he was summarily evicted. This was quite a day. And we have a lot of young people there, particularly students from Ohio State and from Oberlin in Ohio had come. And kids from Earth First had come, and from Occupy Wall Street. And they were incredible. One of the really great things that came out of Riverdale that I would feel remiss if I hadn't mentioned since we're on this photograph is that over that 13 days, we lived democracy. We lived collective decision making. We built ovens, right? We were all living outside on the ground or in these stripped mobile homes. And we engaged in considerable tasks to improve the living conditions of everyone in the park, right? We didn't have plumbing, for example. We didn't have much for electricity, right? But we figured out ways to get it. And we figured out ways to make decisions such that we were all eating and we were all cooking and we were doing all the labor required in the park. And the children who lived there, and we cleaned the park up considerably for the children to make it safer. The children who lived there saw the best example of democratic decision making that they're ever going to have seen in their lives, right up until this police raid. Anything about Riverdale? Yeah.
So I get that even though someone else bought the land and these residents need to move somewhere, were you offering a solution? Were you saying, or were you just out and out saying, no, you can't have it even though the land doesn't belong to the trailer owners?
We were sort of tracking along two rails during the whole time that we were there. One was the defense of the residents at absolute minimum to get a better deal. Right? It costs between $7,000 and $9,000 to move a mobile home. Not to mention the deposit of lot rent in some other location, right? And those lot rents have really gone up. Right? Aqua America had offered these folks $2,500. Right? They just couldn't move on that. There just wasn't any way. And one young man actually put it to me really succinctly. He said, you know, I had a mobile home here. It wasn't much. Right, but I've been building onto it, and it was mine, and I owned it outright. Right, I built a porch on here. Look, I built play stuff for my kids. We were doing better. We were starting to get ahead here. Now he said, I moved my family, including my 2 kids, right, and my wife, into a 1-bedroom apartment, right, for a rent I can't afford, and he's pulling stuff off the mobile home to sell, to make the deposit on that apartment. Right? So part of what we were doing was defending the rights of these people to be treated with some dignity, right? At minimum to get a better deal. And then the other part of it was to defend this from fracking, right? This is a water withdrawal site, right? And within a mile going in either direction from Riverdale and Jersey Shore are 2 more water withdrawal sites for a total of 9 million gallons a day. Right, we're looking at something like, what, about 86 million gallons a year, right? Am I right about that? For water withdrawal in Pennsylvania, for fracking, right? That's water that never can be returned to the water table, never can go back. It's contaminated forever. It goes to deep injection wells in Ohio and places like Youngstown, where we get 4.5 magnitude earthquakes now, right? And it has to be trucked out too, right? And that wastewater is just massively contaminated. Right? And with carcinogens like things like benzene, right, that I wanted to talk about tonight. So does that sort of answer your question?
Thanks,
Yeah. On any given day, there were between about 20 and 50 of us living at the encampment. And I was living there part of the time and had to go home some nights, but I was there as many nights as I could be there. And let me show you some other pictures. Any other questions about Riverdale? It was incredible. Yeah, this is at Schlumberger up in Horseheads. This was quite a massive demonstration. We shut this facility down for a day up in New York. New York, I should note, is currently under moratorium. They don't have fracking in New York. They have just about everything else but fracking in New York. And I will be quite stunned if by the end of next year at the latest, if that moratorium doesn't fall and we see fracking in New York, especially now that they're trying to make up revenues from Hurricane Sandy. And the irony, I was pointing out at dinner, the dark, dark irony of that is that they will allow fracking in New York State, I think, right? I hope I'm wrong, but I think, in order to make up revenue for the devastation from Hurricane Sandy, even though it's fracking that contributes to climate change, right? Because it's another form of fossil fuel extraction, contributes to the very climate change that produces excessive weather events like Hurricane Sandy. This is the one other picture I wanted to go back to. This is Loyalsock Creek, about a mile upstream from the family swimming area in World's End State Park. And some of you may have been here, and you may have been to World's End State Park. Beautiful, beautiful place. And this is bentonite. This is a bentonite spill that was produced when a pipeline that goes underneath Loyalsock Creek, something happened with the pipeline and there was a spill. Now, bentonite itself is not toxic, but bentonite in sufficient quantities can choke, as you can probably fairly easily imagine. It makes a kind of sponge, and it can choke aquatic life like fish. It can choke off all the plants in the stream. And so this was actually going toward the swimming hole. My partner and I photographed, he actually filmed it. You can find the film on State Impact over Labor Day weekend. And DEP didn't want to do anything or any reporting about this because they wanted to make sure that people were still, excited to go to Loyalsock State Park and World's End, right, over the weekend, even though that was in the water.
Is that where the Mark 1 line crossed Loyalsock Creek?
I didn't hear you.
Is that where the Mark 1 line crossed?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and there was a little reporting about it, but it was all kind of a nothing to see here, folks. And that we were, it was a couple of days later.
I might add, this spill was first reported on Thursday of Labor Day weekend. We took these pictures on Saturday. This was a subsequent spill.
Yep.
All through Labor Day weekend, different sludges came down the creek like this repeatedly. So it wasn't just one isolated incident. They had been crossing the creek 12 to 15 miles upstream from where this picture was taken.
Yeah.
At Ringdale.
Quite interesting. Yeah, quite interesting. Let's see here a little bit. Yeah, Anadarko. This is Route 973, right near a fracking site. About 45 minutes from Riverdale or so. And this is my friend Cindy. We were conducting a protest at Bowman Field outside of Williamsport on their baseball We Love the Gas Industry night, and we were right out there on the corner. She's just one of the really stalwart, great troopers, the women of the anti-fracking movement. This is up in Horseheads, and I thought this was actually just an awesome t-shirt that somebody made. Mama don't allow no hiding fracking around here. This is one of the other just really important women of the anti-fracking movement. Her name is Professor Sandra Stangraber. I photographed her from Horseheads. She's delivering an address. She does a lot of work, and she's done some just incredibly interesting work about the use of biocides in the fracking process. And the killing off of microorganisms in the shale. Something I think we actually probably don't think about all that much. And one of the points that she consistently makes in her work is that we could be killing off organisms that could be both possibly very useful to us and possibly, she points out, undiscovered, right? Undiscovered, unclassified. Through our use of biocides to kill everything, right, in the fracking process itself. She's important. This is Rachel Colley from Energy in Depth, one of the folks I was talking about in the last section of the paper, where I argue that I find it incredible and just important and discouraging that the fracking industry itself goes to great effort to employ women to be their agents, their promotional agents. So she's taking pictures of us at a protest up in Horseheads while we're taking pictures of her. And she's, her family is leased out up in New York. And she works for this organization called Energy in Depth, which is one of the leading front groups, I guess I would argue, supported by the petroleum industry. And she writes a long column regularly for Energy in Depth. Nicole Jacobs, Rachel Pollock, Catherine Klaber of the Marcellus Shale Coalition. And I find it just really remarkable, the use of women to promote fracking as safe, as if women wouldn't sell us out on Mother Nature. Another woman up in Horseheads, just really like the sign that she had. Yeah, this is the last picture in the set. This is Rachel DeYoung. She was one of the young women at Riverdale who had come from New York City, from Occupy Wall Street, where she had been living for some months. And she was at Riverdale the whole time. This is at the very end of the raid, 5 hours into the police raid. She's just exhausted. And why exactly she's crying, I don't know. But at this point, we're all sort of crying at this point. Among the last points, the very last paragraph in the paper, maybe a good way to conclude this is just to read that. Connected to this photograph. My point here is not to suggest that women ought never be critics of other women. Of course we should and we must. Neither is my point that, say, Jacobs or Colley of Energy in Depth are simply naive dupes of the fracking industry, right? They're not. My point is that as long as women continue to identify our own advances on a scale determined by and for men, we will continue to contribute to the ongoing entitlement of men's interests. And we cannot afford this in the era of hydraulic fracturing. Whether what we're talking about is exposure to carcinogens that cause breast cancer, or the dispossession of economically vulnerable women and their children like Debette, or the exploitation of cancer in the interest of propagandizing for fracking, or even if what we're talking about are the reasons why intelligent, educated women, like Rachel Colley from the previous picture, like Colleen Jacobs would throw their lots in with the gas. We cannot afford another minute of dithering about what fracking means for women's health or for the conditions of women's lives. If the symbolism contained in the images of Mother Earth have any meaning in the 21st century, it is surely that none cleave more closely to the existential conditions of life than do real flesh and blood mothers, for whom water represents not only the stuff of life, but the tenuousness of life. At the end of fossil fuel extraction is a Mother Earth despoiled, and we have a choice. We can continue on the path of entitlement that will continue to reward the same players, mostly male, mostly white, mostly affluent, until the gas runs out, or we can start screaming. And at this point, we are exhausted, but in many ways we, in the anti-fracking movement, we are screaming. What else can I tell you? Other questions? Yeah. Yes.
Thinking about gender, would you see that there's a gender valuing even of certain types of masculinity in the natural gas industry?
Oh, no doubt.
So that some men's lives are even more substantial than others.
Yeah, it seems to me that's clearly true. I was actually reading just this morning a report about what is called the roughnecks, who work on the rig sites, on the actual rigs. And these are the guys kind of like in oil drilling, the guys who just sort of do all the crap work, who do all just the really hard labor work, the lifting, the hauling, right? And then of course there's also the truck drivers. And the accidents for truck driving in the natural gas industry and the transport side of that accident rate is 3 times higher than the national average for trucking, right? But the lives, the kind of what they're exposed to, just the sheer physical hazards of working on these sites, I think is very worrisome for these guys. You don't see women on these sites. There are not very many. Right? I actually tried to find some articles, and I found a few women kind of diary sorts of articles about women who work on these sites, but you just don't find very many at all. Right? So the hazards may be different, right? But the kinds of chemical hazards that some of these guys are exposed to, right? Besides the fact that they're mostly non-unionized, is considerable. And when you consider that the prediction for Pennsylvania, and I just find these numbers they just kind of blow me away. I get these from Tony and Graffia from Cornell. The prediction is for 100,000 wells in Pennsylvania by 2015.
200,000. 200,000 by 20.
Okay, the last number I saw was 100,000, so fine.
2020.
Great. Even more. Hydrofrac wells, right? Not vertical wells, but hydrofrac wells in Pennsylvania by 2015. The speed of that construction itself is just really worrisome. When we were out, the last time we were out at the Janet Hawk Road site, Dean was talking, this building, I was taking pictures, and we were talking to a security guy that came out and tried to get us off what is a public road, right? So we could be there. I wasn't at that point engaged in criminal trespass. And while we were on the public road taking pictures, and he was trying to get us off, right, Dean was asking him questions about, you know, when they were gonna be done, when they thought they were gonna be done, because this is like Sunday, right? And right after all the rain that came with the hurricane, right? I was really insistent that I get out there because I wanted to see what the mud, what had been washed away by all the rain. I wanted to see what they had done, and I wanted to see what they were doing to abate some of the contamination from all the runoff from the rain. And so we were asking the security guy when they thought they were going to be done, and what was it? What was the
first compressor goes online at the end of this month, and by the first of the year they should have a couple more up and running.
And they were talking about how they already felt like they were late, right? And there's still a lot of pipeline that's, you know, like laying up, it's not even covered up, and they're photographing some of these welds, kind of sketchy looking welds, and so the danger is even greater when they're in that much more of a hurry to get that much more online. And then of course the Transco ultimately connects, or will almost certainly connect to a point in Cove Point, Maryland, an LNG station that's currently being converted from an import into an export station, right? Because this is natural gas. We may want to call it, you know, cheap American and abundant, but this is for export. This is for export, right? And so we will be buying it back, right, from those same corporations, right, at the same price, right? They're going to sell it to the highest bidder, right, at the same price that everybody else is going to be paying for it. Right? But the notion that, you know, Exxon has a stake in selling gas to Americans first just because we're Americans is silliness. That is silliness, and it's no more true than it's ever been true for that corporation. And so, you know, I don't expect that gas is going to stay cheap. As soon as they can get it out, it's going to go up. Yes, sir.
I appreciate the contrast you've laid out here between the kind of democracy that you experienced on this site here versus the kind of so-called democracy out of Harrisburg. And it leads me to wonder if DEP here in Pennsylvania is at best failing to handle some of the issues of fracking. Are there, naive as this may sound, remedies beyond the state government? Are there ways in which the EPA, which national regulations, to which one might appeal to that, both in terms of accessing regulation that might help to minimize fracking and to access organizations that are more sensitive to the impact of fracking on women's health?
Well, there's a lot in that question. I think the answer right at this moment in time, the best answer I can give you is we will see now with the re-election of Barack Obama, because what the EPA is going to look like at the federal level, I think is going to depend at this very moment on what reshuffling actually takes place in those offices. And I suspect, I was actually listening to National Public Radio today about some reshuffling that may be getting ready to take place at that level in those offices. At the state level, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens now with the election of the first woman and the first Democrat, Kathleen Kane, to the Attorney General's office, because she has promised to take more seriously complaints made to the Attorney General's office that have to do with DEP. And she's also promised, and I know this doesn't seem like it's very directly related, to undertake a more serious investigation of, for example, Corbett's tenure during the events that revolved around Sandusky. And so if I were Corbett, I would be feeling relatively fragile at this point. But as that investigation, I think, gets underway, if she makes good on that campaign promise, I think he'll also actually become somewhat more vulnerable to criticism, and so will members of his administration, like Michael Kranter, right, who's the current head of the DEP. I think that whole administration is probably going to look a little more fragile to us pretty soon. And that buoys me, that gets me a little up. Because Michael Kranter, the head of DEP, as far as I can see, it is in effect using his post at DEP as a rehearsal for his next job with gas. That's how I would be inclined to see it. I'll bet you, I would be willing to put money down that this is what Corbett will do when he's out of office.
I might add to that Michael Kranzer actually told the EPA to stay out of Dimmitt when they came in to try to do independent testing of the, to address the complaints of the residents that said their well water was contaminated. DEP and EPA are not on friendly terms at all, and this is a case where Michael Kranzer is appointed by the Corbett administration, and he's going right along like the party line, all the way in support of the gas and support of Corbett. The other thing you might want to add in there too is about the fracking on campus that the Apaches.
Oh yeah,
That Corbett is.
Yeah, there's a whole separate paper there, and for just relevant to university students, not so much for the private schools, but for I'm at Bloom, Pennsylvania State System school, right? There are 14 schools in that state system. Senate Bill 367 that just passed the House 3.5 weeks ago will now allow for all form of fracking operation, transmission line, compressor station, right? Any part of the infrastructure on our campuses, on our university lands, because they're state lands. Right, so you can imagine, for example, at Bloom, or the campuses most vulnerable are Lock Haven, IUP, Slippery Rock, Mansfield, and Bloom was actually on that list, and there's already fracking going on in California. So you can imagine your quad, right, or 300 feet from your classroom, right? And if you need to see what compressor stations sound like, 24/7. Right, 7 days a week, 24/7. You can get onto my Facebook page where I have video of what compressor stations actually sound like when they're running, or dehydrator stations. So imagine that on college campuses. And of course, part of what's important about this is that Corbett continues to slash Pennsylvania State System's university's budget. All right, and as he slashes our budget, right, he offers us this kind of offer we can't refuse, although I would call it just extortion. Right, and says, well, in order to make up the revenue, here's what you can do. Right, contract with Anadarko, right, or XTO, or Shell, or whoever, Chief, Cabot, Range Resources. And then, you can make up the revenue that way. And you could have a new major called frack industry representative or some such on your campuses. And so look up Lock Haven. Right on their welcome page, right, is an advertisement for their new major out of their geology environmental sciences department, ironically enough, for work for folks interested in going to work for the gas industry. Look up IUP. Yes.
You mentioned intellectual women on the side of the gas industry.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you saw your role as an academic, also as an activist, if you found that they may not, I don't want to say listen to you more, but if like you get more responses, or like you or other academic women are more likely to make a statement.
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking.
Yeah.
Let me see if I understand.
Yeah.
Are you asking me if I take myself to be in a position to reach more women, given my academic position, or
Not necessarily women, but like the companies, like would they take you more seriously because of your job?
they fight with me? I routinely, I am quite scrappy, can be, very scrappy, polite, but scrappy. And so you can find me on their website, on the Energy in Depth website, in the comments section, right, of articles they post about the wonders and, fabulousness of fracking. Right? And they will post these articles about that, and and a number of others, right? And many of those folks are indeed women in the anti-fracking movement. We get on and we go to war with the facts. Right? We continue to hammer away and lay out the facts, hoping that we will get people to start to listen. So how much headway we're making, I don't know. I can tell you this much: this movement in the state is growing. They're far better organized still in many ways in New York, because they've had a little more time in New York, because they've got a moratorium, right? So they've had a little more time to organize. Pennsylvania, it hit us like a freight train here, right? And it's a freight train. I'm telling you, it's waiting for a tsunami. And once that Mark I pipeline is hooked up and that's ready for export, right? What was a freight train that hit us is not going to look like anything. It's going to be a tsunami. So we keep screaming, and I think it's just really interesting. And I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised that so many of the folks in this movement have been women. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. But I think among the reasons is because the health impacts are so great and so real for women and for children. The asthma, the levels of ozone produced in and around residential neighborhoods for compressor stations. Dean and I were just a little while ago celebrating one of the small successes, and in the movement you don't get all that many successes, so you celebrate them when they come. The denial of a permit in Missouri County.
State Park.
Yeah, for a compressor station just outside of Francis Slocum State Park in West Wyoming. And I mean, we fought in a whole group of folks who were very well organized, really have their facts clear, and some of their primary spokespersons were also women. And they presented their evidence, and in fact that permit was denied. Right now, they will come back and they will try to get that permit again. They'll come back and they'll come back and they'll come back. But that group of citizens is really well organized to resist that permit. And that's what we've learned in the movement, is that it takes a lot of people to turn out, a lot of people to protest, a lot of people to turn out, very well organizing with the facts. And that's how you actually make your government listen. You have to make them. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of research have you done in the Dimock and Montrose area, especially with the water walk inclinations? And I think the DEP turned back the decision to make Cabot Chesapeake supply the residents with water.
They did, and there were water buffaloes there for a while, and there were actually, interestingly, water buffaloes coming from New York, from places like Binghamton, and lots of private citizens just, hauling water out there. And then EPA came in allegedly check the water again, insist that the water is clean, and so now there are actually plans, I kid you not, to construct more frac pads in Dimmock, and I believe a compressor station there. So folks on Energy in Depth are heralding this as, awesomely great, right, because there's, so much natural gas, and the citizens, Dimmock is a city just destroyed.
Yeah, that's where I'm from. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It seems to me like this is a city that it's not just the erosion of the environment, right? It's the erosion of the community itself. Fracking is incredibly destructive of communities because folks, some lease, some don't, right? But in Pennsylvania, right, you can refuse to lease, right? You can have, your 6 acres and you can say, no to this. But in fact, the corporation, right, you only own the surface rights. You don't own the mineral rights, right? So they, in fact, can come in, right, to build a road or a whatever, right, a parking lot for their trucks on your property, right, if they can get the state to sanction their use of that land as eminent domain, right? And I've seen just some absolutely incredible abuses of eminent domain law in places like Sullivan County. So that's so corrosive to a community, right? Plus, you may be making some money, right, on your leased land, right? And when the landmen came, you may be making a little bit of money, and maybe your neighbor held out a while, all right? And so they may be making quite a bit more money, right, on on a similar sort of lease, but they may be making more money, right? That's very corrosive. And maybe you got your child in a daycare, right? I don't have this picture in the site, it's not my photograph, but I've got these photographs of this daycare center right next to a sand operation, like 300 feet from a sand operation, right? So every day at the daycare, they have to wipe off sand, right? Sand that's connected to something called silicosis, that can erode the inner linings of your lungs and cause serious neurological damage. It's connected to silver mining in the Andes. And so they're wiping the sand off. It's children's play stuff, which I find insane. And that's very community destructive. Trucks, I'm already starting to photograph trucks coming down 47 past my campus, places like the Millville landfill, right, that's only about 40 minutes. I live 25 minutes from what's probably a dead frac pad, 20 minutes from a not yet up and running water withdrawal, 1 hour from that compressor station site, 1.5 hours from active frac plant. Yes?
I have a couple of questions about that Act 13 that you're talking about.
Act 13.
So first of all, is that like federal or state? Or
State, and it's state and currently suspended on constitutional grounds. There's a suit. It may go down as unconstitutional. It's actually sort of unfathomable to me that it won't go down as unconstitutional because it usurps the powers of municipalities to determine the where, the how, right? The what, the where, and the when of fracking within municipalities, and offers them instead in exchange for their giving up that municipal authority and impact fees. Right? We've seen some dollar figures now attached to $560,000 I think this year for the Williamsport area on impact fees, which I know sounds like a lot of money, right? No, and it is a lot of money, but the impact fee pales in comparison to two things. One, the enormous profits that the corporations make, right, into the billions of dollars, and it pales also when you consider that once the gas runs out and the corporation pulls out of that community and the impact fee, right, then that's all done, that goes with it. The environmental destruction, the road destruction, the community destruction, the loss of property value, right, loss of the tanking of property value, right, that's the cancer, right, they leave all that behind. Right, so it seems to me that there's no impact fee exchange that could actually make up for the loss of those municipal powers and will actually pay for the sorts of long-term health and community consequences that will come for those communities. Right? Plus, they don't have the power to determine where any of those fracking operations are even going to be constructed. And so that's part of activity. The other part is the gag order on physicians. Yeah, it's hard to imagine that withstanding constitutional muster. What that gag order says specifically is that if I'm your doctor and you're my patient and you get sick, and I see that this is very likely in virtue of exposure to frac chemicals, right? You live somewhere, you live near a compressor station or a frac pad or something, right? Or leaky transmission line. And I can tell you what the chemicals might have been, but I cannot tell you the amount or the composition, right? The mix with other possible chemicals. So you have to commit to, say, a course of treatment without actually being fully equipped with facts, right? Because it's not just about what the chemicals are, right? It's about what the mix is and about what the quantity was, right? All of those are very salient and important facts to your decision making about what kind of treatment you should have. But you now have to make that decision without being adequately informed, and that, I think, is an egregious violation of patients' rights. It forces doctors to violate, I teach bioethics, to violate the Hippocratic Oath, and it's clearly inconsistent with our constitutional right to access to adequate health care.
So how could they ever have gotten doctors to agree that they
Doctors are actually quite angry about this. One physician in particular, his name is Al Rodriguez, has currently undertaken a suit against the state on behalf of physicians against that particular portion of Act 13. And it will be interesting to see what happens to that in the courts, but I can't fathom that upheld by the courts because it's just so obvious. And it's very obvious in the writing, right? Sections 97 through 99, it's kind of tucked away in those 174 pages, but it's like it's right there. You can look it up online. Yes?
Are there any health issues that are specifically detrimental to children?
Among the health issues that I've run across over the last year, well, exposure to any carcinogen, yeah, certainly health hazard to children. But the one that I actually hear the most about is connected to compressor stations and asthma, childhood asthma. There are increasing numbers of reports of children diagnosed with asthma who live within 1 mile or 2 miles of a compressor station. And it's probably notable here too that if you live in an area, what's determined by the law in PA called a Class 1 area in Pennsylvania, which means that there are fewer than 10 houses per square mile, there are virtually no regulations at all that apply to, for example, the monitoring of transmission lines through that area. So they can construct a transmission line and out of a compressor station site, bury the thing. Nobody's ever really going to go look at it. And DEP is now working very hard to ensure less and less public input into decisions about the construction of that part of the infrastructure in Class 1 areas in Pennsylvania.
And then are there any, like, because a lot of the activism has been geared towards women, is there any activism that geared towards protecting the children?
No, I think that, I'm trying to think about it, if I asked any of the women that I talk to all the time, I think that they would mostly say, as I would, that because the health concerns are so geared toward protecting families, that it includes children. But I don't know of anything that's been directed particularly toward children, narrowly toward children. That was something that I got really familiar with when I was living in the early 1980s in Colorado as an undergrad, because I was active, as were thousands of other people, in protesting Rocky Flats and the rising leukemia rates in that area of Colorado. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I really appreciate your having me tonight. Anybody who would like the whole paper, if you're interested at all in looking at the whole paper, just send me an email. It's W-Lee, L-E-E, @bloomu.edu. I'm happy to send it to whoever would like to look at it.